Talk about the structure and function of bone as an important part of the skeletal system. Bone can be considered both a tissue type, so osseous tissue, as well as an organ that's made up of more than one tissue type. So something just to keep in mind. We'll talk about both. Okay, so first thing I want to do is talk about classifying bones by shape. There's different shapes of bones. Here are a few examples. So we've got flat bones. These are such as the sternum, the skull bones are flat bones. We've got short bones. These are ones that are not any longer than they are wide. So some of the smallest bones up here, ankle bones, are short bones. We've got irregular bones, so ones that don't fall into any other category. And we've got long bones. We're going to be focusing on long bones as our example of looking at the anatomy of bones. Your book also had some nice information on flat bones, which are probably the second most common. I want you to know that there are different shapes of bones, and those different shapes do have different structures within them. So you can imagine flat bone might not have the same amount of bone marrow, it doesn't have the same medullary cavity inside of it. But we're going to be focusing on long bone, especially to start with. You'll also see different books categorizing bones differently. This is, I think, the way that makes the most sense and the simplest, these four categories. So let's talk about long bones. Long bones are made up of several different tissue types. This would be bone as in an organ. You can even see from this picture here, there's several different tissue types. You can just even notice in this schematic diagram. The bone has different locations on it. So the epiphysis are the ends. Epi is on top of. So the epiphysis are at either end of the bone. And we'll talk about bone markings in another lab, like the name, the head, for example. But just the ends of them, there's the proximal and the distal epiphysis. Proximal is the one that's closer to the axis of the skeleton. So this would be like the head of the humerus near your shoulder. And this would be distal, would be farther away by your elbow, if this was your arm bone, which it is. The diaphysis is then the shaft. That's that middle portion. This is some terminology that's going to be helpful when we're talking about things like bone growth, to know those terms. Then we've got different components inside and outside of the bone. So we've got this lining of articular cartilage that lines both epiphyses. If you zoom in here, you can see it doesn't really show much more here. This articular cartilage is hyaline cartilage. That's what it's made up of. So remember, I told you that was going to be the most important type for the skeletal system. This is where there's a joint here. So articular cartilage is going to be where it articulates with another bone. Then we've got within the bone some different types. We've got spongy bone, which I'll get back. You can see the zoom in here. I'll get back to that in a moment. And then we've got compact bone. That is a lot harder, and that is along the entire shaft here. Inside the compact bone, there is a cavity, this medullary cavity. You zoom into that over here, it contains bone marrow. This is yellow bone marrow that's most prevalent in most of our long bones. It is made up of lipids, so it's actually a fat storage. Then the other things we've got here are this periosteum. So remember that periosteum refers to the covering around the bone. Peri is around. Osteum refers to the bone. Perichondrium surrounds cartilage tissue. Periosteum surrounds bone tissue. The thing to note here is the blood vessels. So there are blood vessels in bone, the organ, that's unlike cartilage. So bone is vascular, and that allows it to actually heal fairly well. So let's zoom into a little bit more anatomy, primarily looking at compact bone, but I do want you to see the spongy bone here. Also, the main component here is these trabeculae. So spongy bone is going to be a lot less dense, a lot less compact. And that allows for the inside of the bone to still be strong, but a little bit lighter than the bone would be if it was all made of compact bone. So compact bone is what we'll look at in lab in histology as well. And compact bone is made up of osteons. Osteons are the structural unit of compact bone. So this here is a single osteon. This here is a single osteon, all these circles. So they all contain one central canal, and in the central canal, there are nerves and blood vessels going through here. This is what's going to provide oxygen and receive carbon dioxide and glucose to all the cells that are surrounding the central canal. These concentric lines around here are lamellae, and these are concentric lamellae. Concentric circles go around these central canals. So there's our osteon. We've got our periosteum on the outside. Endosteum means inside. That's going to be on the inside. And then remember, bone is made up of collagen fibers. So the matrix is mostly these collagen fibers along with calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate that makes it a dense, strong, almost like the collagen is steel rods, and then the calcium is concrete that's poured in between there. It's a composite material. We zoom into an osteon. This is what this looks like at on a histology slide. So the microscopy of an osteon. Notice these osteons are cylinders. So it's like they're the length of the whole bone. And then we're zoomed in here to a slice of one of an osteon. So just a slice through. And then we can see a few more things that we want to talk about. So we got the central canal here. This is where the blood vessels and nerves would go through. Then we've also got these lamella are the circles that go around. And the other really important thing here is lacuna with osteocytes in them. Remember lacuna, they are those cavities that contain cells. The cells of bone tissue are called osteocytes. We'll come back to them more. And then you can see the cute little extensions they have off of them that are going to allow a little cell that's in here to extend the cell next to it in this lamella through the canaliculi. Canaliculi are little channels where these adjacent osteocytes can talk to each other. They can share nutrients that are coming from the central canal out through gap junctions. So cytoplasmic extensions of these neighboring osteocytes allow for the transport of oxygen out to this outside osteocyte, and carbon dioxide and other wastes back to the bloodstream here. And I'll talk more about osteocytes, osteoblasts, other cells in the next lecture. So this is kind of a nice diagram of showing how strong bones are. These two layers, the outside being compact bone, the inside being spongy bone, and then the inside being empty, allows them to be really strong where some more support is needed. So this thick layer is where compression most often happens. And there's actually remodeling that happens to make this even more efficient. And the spongy bone is located at the places where it's less sturdy. It's open, right? And this can withstand stress in many different directions then. So these are at the ends where you need to have that many different directions. It's kind of like dense irregular connective tissue and dense regular connective tissue, what reminds me of. And then we've got our medullary cavity. What things aren't shown here? Blood vessels, yellow marrow, and red marrow. Could you label the parts of this bone? Epiphysis, diaphysis, and epiphysis. The metaphysis that's in between, I'm not going to use that term very much. Here is an image of a short bone, just showing you kind of how it looks different. The spongy bone and compact bone are in different proportions in this short bone, just to show you kind of the diversity of that. Okay, last thing for this lecture is on red and yellow bone marrow. So you saw yellow bone marrow in that other picture. The reason there wasn't red bone marrow is because it's not very prevalent in adults. There's not very many locations where it still is located. In infants, it's located throughout the entire long bone. Remember, red bone marrow is where red blood cells are produced, new blood cells. And this is important in adults as well. It's just not located throughout the entire long bone anymore. So throughout childhood and into adolescence, yellow marrow takes up more and more of the long bone until in an adult, that red bone marrow is really just at the head of this is the femur or the humerus that this would be located in. So this is kind of showing that development throughout time. In adults then, red bone marrow, this actually makes it look like quite a few places still. It's located in these locations here. So the skull, the ribs, the sternum, the vertebrae, the pelvic girdle here, and then the heads of the femur and humerus. In the rest of these long bones, what's in there? Yellow bone marrow. So what we've done here is identify and describe the structural components of a long bone and the functions of these parts. One part I just realized I didn't say is the epiphyseal line. I'll come back to this when we talk about bone growth. This is a line that is visible in between at the epiphysis of the bone. So I'll come back to this. You will definitely learn about it. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Then we've got describe the structure of compact bone and spongy bone. Primarily talked about compact, but a little bit this term for spongy bone as well. And this you'll see in lab as well, the compact bone. Lastly, describe the location and distribution of yellow and bone marrow, how it varies during the lifetime.